The first time I noticed the lock was gone, I didn't plan on looking inside. It had been there for months, a thick chain looped twice through the handle of Unit 128, padlock big enough to break a thumb if it swung wrong. I'd pass it every Saturday when I came to shuffle boxes in my own unit, always catching that faint chemical scent of mothballs and dust through the vents. But that morning, the chain was hanging loose, and the door was open just enough for the light to catch on something metallic inside. I told myself to mind my business. This place was full of people's secrets, broken marriages, failed businesses, dead relatives, things no one wanted to throw away. But the gap in the door pulled at me. I set my own box down, slid my fingers under the cool metal lip, and eased it open. The air inside was dry, almost sterile. Rows of shelves ran the length of the narrow unit, and on each shelf neat stacks of objects. Wallets, phones, notebooks, watches, pairs of shoes lined up with military precision. It took me a second to realize the arrangement wasn't random. The items were grouped in perfect sequences, a wallet next to a phone, next to a folded jacket, next to a photograph. Each cluster looked like a person's life distilled into a handful of belongings, frozen mid-step. I picked up a photograph from one stack. A man smiling at the beach, the sun behind him. Something about his face tugged at my memory. I put it down fast and moved to the next shelf. Another stack, another life. A necklace, a grocery list, a scuffed pair of boots. Halfway down the row, I saw something that made my skin pull tight. A laminated newspaper clipping, folded neatly under a set of car keys. The headline was visible through the plastic, "Local man missing since 2018, and the photo was the same man from the beach. I stepped back, heart pounding so hard it felt like the sound was trapped in my ears. Every stack in that unit. They weren't just random things. They were the last possessions of people who had vanished. And the shelves went all the way to the back wall. I should have shut the door, pretended I hadn't seen any of it. Instead, I found myself kneeling on the cold concrete, sliding objects around, scanning the stacks for more clippings. Every pile told a story, but the dates were the thing that hooked me. Some were yellowed and brittle, the missing notices nearly a decade old. Others were crisp, the ink still sharp, like they'd been printed last week. I started counting. There were 31 clusters in total. I knew better than to touch my phone inside the unit. Some instinct told me not to leave a record just yet. But the names burned themselves into my head. Miller, Sanchez, Duval, Renner. By the time I stepped out into the dim corridor, I already knew what I was going to do. Back at my own unit, I shut the roll-up door and sat in the dark with my phone. I typed the names into the state missing persons database. The hits came fast. Every single one of them had an official report, dates of disappearance, last known locations, most within 100 miles. And then there was the most recent entry. Renner Claudia, last seen August 2nd, 2025. It was August 6th. Her photo wasn't grainy like the others. It was a high-resolution image. She looked like she could have been standing behind me in line at the grocery store. In the picture, she had a black scarf draped around her neck. My mind replayed the shelves in Unit 128 and landed on the soft, folded fabric I'd brushed against without thinking. I shut my eyes. That scarf had still been warm. When I opened them again, I noticed something I'd missed before. The database showed not just where the missing were last seen, but when, and 5 of the most recent disappearances had happened within a half-mile of this storage facility. I was still staring at the screen when the overhead fluorescent outside my door flickered, then went out entirely. The hallway fell into a heavy silence, no humming lights, no distant roll-up doors. And from down the row where Unit 128 sat, I heard the faint metallic sound of a chain being drawn through a handle. Slowly, carefully. The sound stopped halfway through, like whoever was threading the chain had paused. I strained to hear more, but the hallway gave nothing back. I slid my phone into my pocket and pressed my ear to my own roll-up door. From here, every tiny noise traveled along the metal like a wire. There it was again, the faint drag of the chain, the clink of a padlock closing. Then footsteps, not hurried, not heavy, just steady, deliberate steps heading toward the exit. A moment later, the faint beep of the facility's outer keypad. The footsteps didn't come back. I cracked my door open, just enough to see down the corridor. Unit 128 was shut tight now, a brand new brass lock gleaming under the dim emergency light. I couldn't see anyone, but the air still felt pressed down, as if the space itself was holding its breath. That was when I noticed something else. My own unit door had a smear across it, a thin, dusty streak, right where someone's hand might have brushed against the metal. But the dust wasn't like the normal gray grit from the hallway. This was darker, reddish, and faintly damp, as though it hadn't dried yet. I stepped back inside, rolled the door down, and pulled the latch shut without locking it. I sat with my back against a stack of boxes, phone in my lap, staring at the thin seam of light under the door. After a few minutes, the sound came again, soft, barely there, a rustle, a shifting weight. Only this time it wasn't from the hallway. It was inside Unit 128, and whatever was moving in there was dragging something across the floor, something that sounded too heavy to lift. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember the walk to my car. But I do remember one thing. As I drove past the facility gate, the keypad light flicked on. A shadow leaned in, locking it for a second, then stepped away. In the rearview mirror, I could see the gate sliding shut, and I realized I'd never heard it open. The train wasn't on the schedule. It shouldn't have been there. No announcements, no platform number, just the sound of doors hissing open into a car lit too brightly for midnight. Inside, the seats were spotless, the air still and faintly metallic, like no one had sat here in weeks. I stepped in anyway. The wheels began to roll before I could find a seat. The station platform slid away into blackness, replaced by a tunnel that seemed to stretch far longer than the one I passed through every night. My phone clock ticked normally, but each second felt like it lingered too long. Only 2 other passengers sat in the carriage, both staring straight ahead, perfectly still. They didn't look tired, just fixed. I kept my eyes on the window, but the reflection didn't feel right. The fluorescent lights inside seemed sharper than the shadows outside, and every time the train swayed, the view outside flickered like an old film reel skipping. We passed what should have been the 3rd stop on my route. The station sign flashed by wrong color, wrong font. I'd never seen it before. My phone's GPS spun uselessly, showing I was somewhere between 2 entirely different lines. The map was a blur of overlapping coordinates. The conductor never came. No ticket check, no announcement. Just the constant, low hum of wheels on tracks. I thought about getting off at the next stop until I saw it. The platform we pulled into was completely empty. Not just of people, but of ads, trash bins, even benches. A flat, sterile concrete expanse. When the doors opened, neither of the other passengers moved. I didn't either. The sound the doors made when they closed was softer this time, almost deliberate, like they were making sure not to disturb something. We slid back into the tunnel. I told myself I'd recognize the next station. I didn't. I tried to count the stops. It gave me something to hold on to, like a thread in a maze. 1, 2, then a long stretch with no lights outside. By the third stop, I realized I hadn't heard the brakes squeal once, just a steady deceleration, unnervingly smooth. The stations themselves didn't look abandoned, just unfinished, like they were waiting for someone to decide what they'd be. Pale walls, no posters, no scuff marks where thousands of shoes should have worn the tile dull. I craned my neck to look into the next carriage, but the door's window was dark, as if the lights were out beyond it. The 2 passengers were still frozen in place. I tried watching their reflections in the glass instead of staring directly. A trick I'd read somewhere about making people less aware they're being watched. But their reflections didn't track perfectly with their movements. One seemed to blink half a second too late, the other not at all. When we finally stopped at a station with a name I recognized, my relief almost made me stand, but the name was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The letters were right, the arrangement correct, but the color of the sign, the spacing, even the typeface were subtly off. Like someone had rebuilt the station from memory and got the details wrong. I didn't get off. I wanted to, but my legs felt heavy, my mind half convinced that stepping onto the platform would be like stepping into the wrong photograph. I'd never make it back to the original frame. When the train finally lurched, the first lurch all night, it was into total darkness. No tunnel lights, no emergency strips along the floor. I gripped the pole beside me, telling myself I'd report all this when I got home. Take pictures. Compare timetables. Prove it wasn't just fatigue playing tricks. But when we emerged, it wasn't into a station. We slid past what looked like another train, sitting dead on the parallel track. Its windows were black, but I caught my own reflection in the glass, except I wasn't alone in it. There was someone sitting beside me in the reflection that wasn't in the seat in real life. I stopped looking after that. When the doors finally opened onto my actual home station, I stumbled out. The air felt too thin, like I'd climbed a set of stairs too fast. I turned, ready to see the train pulling away, but there was nothing. Just an empty track and the fading echo of wheels that might have never been there. I went straight to the station's night supervisor's booth, half ready to sound like a lunatic. I told him a train had just dropped me off but wasn't listed on the departures board. He stared at me for a long second before leaning back in his chair and checking the CCTV feed. The screen showed the platform, empty for the past 2 hours. No arrivals, no trains, not even me stepping onto the platform. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the motion of the carriage kept replaying, that frictionless glide, the wrong silence, the way the reflections lagged. By morning, I'd convinced myself to treat it like a case, document everything, Notebooks, timestamps, diagrams. I even sketched the platform signs, every wrong curve of the letters, the off-kilter spacing. If I could nail down the differences, maybe I could track where I'd been. The station supervisor was polite but useless. "Could be a maintenance run," he said, eyes already drifting back to his clipboard. But maintenance trains didn't take passengers, and they didn't stop at stations that looked like unfinished models. I filed an incident report anyway, knowing it would probably end up in a folder marked non-urgent anomalies. Then I started digging into public transit forums, obscure threads where people complained about phantom delays or missing trains. 3 posts in particular caught my attention. All different usernames, years apart, but the descriptions overlapped in a way that felt too precise to be coincidence. Each mentioned boarding a late-night train, almost empty, except for 2 silent passengers. Each claimed the stations looked too clean, or like placeholders, and each ended the same way, stepping off onto a platform where CCTV never caught their arrival. One even mentioned seeing themselves reflected with an extra figure beside them. That was when I went back to the station with my phone set to record. My plan was simple: stay late, wait for the last train, film everything. I stayed until the last scheduled departure rolled through, crowded, loud, normal, and then the boards went blank. I almost left. But then, with no announcement, another train slid in. Same model, same empty carriages, same 2 passengers sitting in the same seats. I stepped inside before I could change my mind, my phone hidden in my jacket, recording through a buttonhole. We pulled away, and once again, the first 3 stations were unfamiliar. My recording picked up the hum of the lights, the faint rattle of the tracks, but something was missing. No brake squeals, no chatter, no station announcements, just my own breathing. When we finally stopped at one of the placeholder stations, I forced myself to get out. The air was wrong. Not cold, not warm, just unmeasured. The platform stretched out into darkness in both directions. No exit signs, no maps. And when I turned back toward the train, the windows were pitch black, even though the carriage lights had been on seconds before. I started walking, counted my steps, 50, 60, 70, and then I realized the tiles under my feet were repeating. Same faint crack in the grout, same scuff near the edge every 10 paces. I turned to run back toward the train. It wasn't there,